She would wake up before the sun, the faint rays barely filtering through the curtains of their small bedroom. The quiet of the early morning was her constant companion. The sound of the alarm clock was no longer needed. Her body had already grown accustomed to the exhaustion that awaited her each day. Every morning, she made a point of getting up with determination, maintaining the smile that, over time, had become her armor. Beside the bed sat her husband, motionless, dependent on her for every small movement. He, seated in his wheelchair, looked at her with the same eyes that once made her feel loved, but now carried a weight even he couldn't explain. The wheelchair had become part of their lives years ago, but the impact still felt painfully fresh for both of them. The words he didn't say, the anger he didn't show, were as loud as the silence between them. Then she would help him up, with the same delicate strength she had cultivated over the years, careful with every movement, adjusting his posture, making sure he was comfortable. "I do this for us," she would repeat to herself every day, but something in her voice didn't sound as convincing as before. Maybe it was the fatigue that had taken over her muscles, or maybe it was something deeper, something she hadn't yet recognized. With him properly settled, she would hurry to prepare breakfast, her movements automatic, almost mechanical. After ensuring everything was in order, she changed her clothes and left for another day of work, leaving her heart divided between the home she supported and the man she loved. Working as a cleaner in several homes, she threw herself into each task as if it were the only way to survive the relentless routine. While cleaning, washing, and caring for other people's homes, her mind would wander. What would happen if one day she just stopped? She didn't have time for such questions. The money she earned was necessary, and she knew that without it, their life would fall apart even faster. But amidst all the hard work, something was bothering her. Something she couldn't quite identify yet, but it was starting to grow inside her like a silent shadow. As she scrubbed the cold kitchen floor of yet another house, her mind drifted to the sacrifices she had made over the years. It was something she avoided thinking about, but lately, these reflections had been following her into every corner she cleaned. The demanding routine, the exhaustion in her body, the wrinkles on her face weren't just signs of time, but the weight of the burden she carried. She remembered the dreams she had when she was younger, of a simple but happy life beside the man she loved. When they got married, she never imagined their path would be derailed by a tragedy that would trap her in a life of continuous sacrifice. But she had accepted it, and for years believed that her strength was a testament to her love. He needed her, and she was there, always present, day after day. But lately, something inside her had started to change. No matter how hard she tried to push those thoughts away, they kept coming more often. Was this fair to her? Over time, the sense of duty began to mix with a quiet, almost cruel doubt. She loved her husband. There was no denying that. But the life she led, the choices she made, were they truly her choices? Or were they imposed by his circumstances, his limitations? Beneath her facade, there was exhaustion. Not just physical, but emotional. Something was eating away at her. "I'm not giving up on him," she would repeat mentally, as if needing to convince herself of that. Yet for the first time in a long while, she wondered if there was still room for herself, for her own dreams. The day seemed like just another in her exhausting routine. The house was quiet, as always, with her husband resting in the bedroom while she organized the forgotten cabinets in the living room. As she moved a pile of old blankets, something hard fell to the floor. It was a small, aged wooden box, its lid covered with a light layer of dust. She didn't remember ever seeing it before. Curious, she carefully wiped the box and without hesitation opened the lid. What she found inside made her heart race. There were yellowed letters, aged by time, written in the handwriting she immediately recognized as her husband's. However, the content was what left her shaken. He had been writing to someone else, a woman. The words were filled with emotions she hadn't seen in their relationship for a long time. With trembling hands, she pulled out the letters and realized there was something else at the bottom of the box. It was an old photograph, from a time when her husband could still walk. He was smiling next to an unknown woman, much younger and vibrant. She had never seen this woman before. And that smile, it wasn't the smile he gave her. An intense pain shot through her chest. It was as if the ground beneath her feet had crumbled. She collapsed onto the sofa, staring at the photo, trying to make sense of what it all meant. Who was that woman? And why had her husband kept those letters for so long? He had been hiding something big. The initial shock left her speechless. She wanted to confront him right then and there, but she held back. Something inside her knew that if she wanted answers, she would need to dig deeper. Raising questions now, without more information, might not give her the whole truth. What else was being hidden? Why, after all these years of sacrifice, had he never mentioned that part of his past? Her mind began racing, replaying conversations, small gestures, and silences from her husband that now seemed to take on new meaning. The doubt that had once been a soft breeze was now turning into a storm, devastating. She didn't know what to do, but one thing was clear. She could no longer ignore it. The days following the discovery of the box felt endless. Every time she looked at her husband, a sense of strangeness overwhelmed her. The man she cared for, whom she loved and had sacrificed so much for, now seemed like a stranger. The photograph and letters weighed on her mind like an anchor, keeping her trapped in a sea of uncertainties. At night, while he slept peacefully, she found herself reliving moments from the past. The early years of their marriage, his little habits, the seemingly trivial conversations. Now, with this new perspective, those moments took on a disturbing significance. Small gestures she had never questioned before, like the hurried way he would change the subject when they talked about the past, or the long, thoughtful gazes he cast out the window. At the time, she had believed it was all part of his pain from being confined to a wheelchair. But what if it was something more? She also remembered the periods when he seemed distant, emotionally unavailable, as if he were somewhere else. The weight of her sacrifices had never been fully reciprocated with emotional support. But she had never questioned it, believing her role was simply to care and support. Now, though, it all felt like a cruel facade. As she cleaned the kitchen, the tension in her body intensified. The dishes, the floor, the walls. Everything around her seemed to suffocate her with the memory of what she had uncovered. And at the center of it all was her husband, silent, dependent, but full of secrets. She wondered, with a heavy heart, who really was the man she had built her life with. This doubt gnawed at her, as she struggled to understand if she had ever truly known his essence or if there had always been something hidden, invisible beneath the surface. The doubt became unbearable. She knew she could no longer ignore what she had found. With a mix of anxiety and determination, she began her own silent investigation, as if each move was a step toward a truth that could shatter everything she believed in. The first place she started was their own bedroom, the space where so many confidences should have been shared. Rummaging through drawers she once thought she knew so well, she found small details that had gone unnoticed over the years. Old receipts, worn business cards from people she had never heard of, and more letters, all written in careful handwriting that wasn't his. Each item was like a piece of a dark puzzle slowly revealing itself to her. She tried not to raise suspicion, masking her anguish with forced smiles and the same careful routine as always. While taking care of her husband, she now watched him from a new perspective, trying to decipher if the man who had always seemed so dependent carried within him another life, hidden for years. The investigation extended beyond the walls of the house. The protagonist began to discreetly ask questions to a few close friends and family members, always cautiously, so no one would suspect her true intentions. Some conversations seemed innocent, but in others she detected small pauses, averted glances, and details left out. It was as if everyone knew something she didn't, something that had never been spoken but was always lurking, hidden between the lines of the most casual dialogues. One afternoon, while talking to an old friend of the couple, She noticed hesitation in her response to a simple question about his past. The brief silence, the uncomfortable look. It struck her like a signal that there was more, something she still couldn't grasp, but that was there, lurking beneath the surface of everyday life. With every new clue, her heart grew heavier. The truth was closing in, but with it came the pain of realizing that the man she had dedicated so many years and sacrifices to might never have been who she thought. Each detail she uncovered brought with it growing anguish, as if the ground beneath her feet was slowly crumbling. And the more she discovered, the clearer it became. There was another story, another past, another side of him that she had never known. And it was about to be revealed. The silence began to speak louder than words. Days had passed since the protagonist started uncovering hidden truths, and the weight of what she had found was slowly suffocating her. She could no longer look at her husband in the same way. The fragile, dependent man she cared for every day now seemed like a stranger, someone with secrets buried deep in his past. At the dinner table, the clinking of utensils was the only sound breaking the uncomfortable silence. She served the food automatically, her gestures mechanical, her mind distant, trapped in the details of the letters and photographs. He watched her, noticing the subtle changes, the coldness in each touch, the distant look that avoided meeting his. But despite his attempts, he couldn't figure out what was going on. "You're different," he commented one afternoon while she was making the bed. The statement was direct, but there was a fragility in it. It was as if he sensed something was wrong but didn't know what, nor if he was ready to hear it. She froze for a moment, hands still holding the sheets. The question echoing in her mind was, should she tell him? Should she reveal everything, confront him, demand answers? Or should she keep pretending everything was fine, maintaining the facade of normalcy in a home that was slowly crumbling inside? The internal conflict was devastating. If she confronted him, she risked destroying what was left. But if she stayed silent, the lie would suffocate them both. She took a deep breath and continued making the bed without responding. She knew that this silence, this distance, was only the beginning. The storm was brewing, and there was no way to avoid the confrontation for much longer. That night, the silence was abruptly broken. The protagonist could no longer bear the weight of the discovery alone. While her husband was distracted watching TV, she slowly approached, feeling her heart race, as if every step she took confirmed that there was no turning back. "I found your letters," she said in a firm but trembling voice. He immediately turned off the television and looked at her confused. "What letters?" he asked, worry in his eyes. "Don't play dumb," she continued, pulling the old letters and photograph from a nearby drawer. "These letters. This photo. Why did you never tell me about this? What else are you hiding from me?" The air in the room became heavy, dense. He stared at the letters for a few seconds, his eyes reflecting both shock and shame. He tried to say something, but the words seemed stuck in his throat. I didn't know how to tell you," he finally said, his voice low, almost a whisper.
"Didn't know how?" she almost shouted, anger mixing with sadness. "All these years, I sacrificed myself for you, gave up my life, my dreams, and you hid this from me? Who are you, really? Why did you lie?"
He tried to shake his head, his eyes starting to fill with tears. "I didn't lie. I just withheld it. I thought it didn't matter anymore, that it was part of my past, before you. I didn't want to hurt you." "Didn't want to hurt me?" She felt a lump form in her throat. "What hurts is that all these years I stood by your side believing you were someone you're not. You built a life on lies." He lowered his head, unable to meet her gaze. "I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me from what? From a truth that would have changed everything from the start? I don't know what to believe anymore. I don't even know who you are." The tension in the air was unbearable. Her husband tried to approach, but she took a step back, as if any touch from him would feel like another betrayal. Both knew that even if explanations were given, the scars left by that revelation were too deep to be ignored. And in that moment, She realized that things would never be the same again. The house felt emptier than ever. Every corner held memories that now seemed to crumble under the weight of the truth. She sat on the couch, her eyes lost on the wall where a picture of them smiling hung, in a painfully ironic way. Was that happiness real or just a facade, built on a foundation of secrets? The silence was deafening. She could hear the distant sound of rain tapping against the window, as if the world outside was reflecting the whirlwind of emotions inside her. She felt drained, as if all the sacrifices she had made over the years were being thrown away. Every time she looked at her husband, now isolated in the bedroom, the pain of his betrayal tightened her chest. Did she ever really know him? Did she even know herself? She thought of the years of struggle, effort, and unconditional love she had given, believing she was building something solid. But now, all of that seemed hollow. What if she had made a different decision back then? What if she had chosen to live for herself instead of sacrificing for someone who harbored such deep secrets? The weight of doubt was crushing her. No matter how hard she tried to find a way out, everything seemed like an emotional dead end. There was no more trust, no certainty that the future could be fixed. A single tear slid silently down her face as her broken heart sank further. She knew this was rock bottom, the point where everything could completely fall apart. Climbing out of that emotional abyss felt impossible. She woke up with the weight of the night still hanging over her, but something inside her had changed. The emotional chaos that had consumed her for days now seemed clearer, more organized, as if, finally, all the pieces of a painful puzzle had fallen into place. She wiped the last of her tears and stood up. The silence around her was the same, but this time, it didn't suffocate her. On the contrary, it seemed to make space for something she hadn't heard in a long time. Her own voice. She knew what needed to be done. There were no more doubts. She looked around the house she had fought so hard to maintain, the home she had built with sacrifices and hopes. But now, every wall, every object seemed part of a life that was no longer hers. The love that had driven her, that had kept her strong, was now tainted by secrets, and she could no longer pretend that everything was okay. With determined steps, she walked to the table and picked up a notebook. She opened to the first blank page and, taking a deep breath, began to outline her next steps. It was time to start over. The notes flowed onto the paper like a kind of release, a plan for a future where she wouldn't have to carry the burden of a life that wasn't genuine. As she finished the last line, she allowed herself to feel a small sense of relief. There was something terrifying about leaving everything behind, but at the same time, a spark of hope flickered on the horizon. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but she was certain it was time to move on. The morning sun gently touched her face as she stepped outside for the first time, free from all the chains of her past. Her steps, once heavy and uncertain, now carried a newfound lightness. She could still feel the emotional scars, deep marks that time wouldn't erase, but something inside her had changed. A strength she never imagined she had was beginning to blossom. In this new chapter of her life, fear was no longer the driving force. She found support in unexpected places. Old friends, distant relatives, and even neighbors who had never gone beyond a simple good morning became sources of comfort. Each conversation, each embrace, helped her see that while the weight of her sacrifice was real, she didn't have to carry it alone. There was still much to be resolved. The doubts about the future and the wounds left by the past were still there, but she was no longer bound by those invisible chains. She had made a choice to start over, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. As she walked down the street, a soft breeze caressed her face, and for the first time in a long while she smiled genuinely. There was life beyond the pain, and she was ready to embrace it fully. What lay ahead was still uncertain, but hope shone in her eyes, ready to face whatever came next. This wasn't the end of her story, just the beginning of a new journey. What would you do in Maria's place? Would you give the relationship another chance? Leave a comment below to tell us what you would do. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and press the bell icon so you don't miss any stories like this.